So with that, I'd like to invite Jerry O'Callaghan, Investor Relations, JBS, to come forward, as well as Brian Dearland, Director of Federal Government Relations, Cargill. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
It's interesting to start with, I think, to see Cargill and JBS doing a joint presentation. I think that's groundbreaking to start with, huh? And then an Irish guy who lived in Brazil, representing JBS, and our true American here. So quite a diverse sort of background here. Eu queria também cumprimentar os nossos amigos do Brasil. Eu sei que tem muita gente do Brasil, então uma palavra em português. Bem-vindo, é prazer estar aqui. Just a word in Portuguese for our Brazilian friends, which I thought would be nice for them. Brian and I, we've prepared a few slides. Basically, it's a very general presentation about the global system. We think it's a lot more important to listen to the regional presentations, which will be a lot richer in detail. So we're going to cut through this as quickly as we can and get down to the regional and the more detailed presentations, and I'll hand it over to Brian to take it from here.
Thank you for joining us. Yeah, I'm a South Texan, so if my accent comes clear or comes through, I'll do my best. Welcome to Denver. It's been a pleasure putting this conference together, and myself and Jerry are both pleased to be able to give a pretty high-level overview on the global beef system. Jason spoke about this a few minutes ago. I think no conversation about the future of agricultural production would be complete without highlighting what we will face in the future. Jason talked about a future population by 2050 of 9.1 billion. This chart here talks about approaching 10. Whether the number is 9.1 or 10 billion by 2050, suffice it to say, there's going to be a lot more people to feed by the time 2050 arrives. And it creates some interesting challenges from a sustainability point of view. You've got to feed them. And as Jason pointed out, how do you feed them on an agricultural footprint about the same size as the one that we have today? From a sustainability standpoint, it does create just an interesting challenge about how to do that. We talked about the Green Revolution, about the advances made in India, Mexico, South America, in different places. But there are parts of the world, believe it or not, where the Green Revolution still hasn't occurred. So there's still a lot of opportunities to be made. But this is a key important part of what will be challenging, of what we will be facing in the future. But this is an aggregate number. The number and the challenge is even more stark when you realize that in the places where the population will be increasing are areas where it's difficult to grow food because of environmental factors, because of rainfall factors, because of issues where there's infrastructure problems, issues with property rights, a whole host of reasons that make it difficult to grow food in the places where the population will be growing. It creates a unique challenge. So in this area, when you start talking about sustainability, it's going to take a lot of factors to increase, to solve the problem, to provide, to improve the sustainability of production in these areas. Outside the box thinking, it'll be more than just improving agricultural production to increase sustainability of beef production and food production generally. We'll have to talk about trade. We'll have to talk about economic development. We'll have to talk about moving product from places that are more efficiently capable of producing it to places that can't grow it more efficiently. It's not just about growing more food in places where there are people, it's about getting food to places where they need it. It might not be sustainable to grow more food where the people are. That might not be the sustainable solution. So to find these sustainable solutions will entail outside-the-box thinking to get food to places where it's needed over time. So what's that have to do with the beef industry? We'll let Jerry talk about that.
You see, this has been rehearsed, huh? Again, you know, this slide here is just to demonstrate the population growth against a declining herd. We're coming up with just the same numbers over and over again, but it's just the challenge it is in an environment where we've already had a declining commercial herd globally, and where we've got this population growth. And if we project this forward to 2050, obviously we're going in a direction which is unsustainable. This chart demonstrates a little bit. This map demonstrates where the global herd is. So it's not a percentage growth or decline, it's just where the herd is. And basically, we have to think about breaking it up into the Bos indicus and the Bos taurus. And what we see as we move forward, we see a declining Bos taurus, a European-type cattle, native-type cattle of the northern hemisphere, and we see an increasing Bos indicus, or cattle of Indian origin, and that has a lot to do with productivity as well, and we can talk about that later, because Indian cattle generally, they are not fed intensively. They need a longer period of time to mature to slaughter age, and they need very specific type of climate, which is not very cold, so it limits that Bos indicus to a certain region in the world, which I think is an interesting discussion for us to take up a little bit later on. I'm going to hand it back to Brian now to take this slide.
Well, what's interesting about the declining number of cattle within the commercial cattle herd which is the black bar, is notice the red bars. Beef production has increased slightly over time and fallen off the past couple of years, which is indicated by the red bars. So some of the folks that are very active in the beef industry might understand why that's the case. For those that maybe haven't been as active in the beef industry, you might ask yourself the question now, if cattle numbers of the commercial herd are falling so precipitously, as indicated by the black line, why is beef production kind of held pretty steady or increased? It's because carcass weight, or beef production per animal, has gone up fairly consistently over time. In the U.S., our carcass weights in the U.S. have gone up on average about 5 pounds per animal, per carcass, 5 pounds per animal, pretty steadily since 1970. 5 pounds per animal since 1970. There's a bit of debate within our company about whether or not we can continue adding 5 pounds per year on an annual basis, but that's been the case. So what you see is that despite the fact that cattle numbers continue to decline, the increase in carcass weight has been able to maintain beef production numbers on a pretty steadily increasing basis, which is a measure of efficiency. To put this in an animal unit basis, we are able to produce as much beef from 4 animals today in the U.S. as we were from 5 animals in 1970 as a measure of efficiency.
Brian talked about trade, and I think international trade is an essential ingredient as we look forward. Basically, going back to the same argument, we see consumption increasing in regions where there is not the ability to increase production to the same extent. And when we look at global beef production, about 60 million tons annually, more than 1/3 of that is produced in 2 countries, the US and Brazil. So not wanting to belittle any other part of the world, but Brazil and the US are the axis around which the beef industry is going to have to be more efficient and grow its production and basically export more. For instance, in the US, with currency movements that we see recently, production costs in the US are actually lower than they are in Brazil right now and in other parts of the world. And the US is becoming, with the efficiency that Brian just talked about, it's becoming a very efficient production to export platform and invading territory which was traditionally occupied by Europe until BSC about 12, 15 years ago, which was then occupied by South America, particularly Brazil over the last decade. Now it's tending towards coming to the US, as the US being an export nation. But Goldman Sachs does a study, and we put up the slide. It's what they feel the situation will be, the balance will be in 2015. And so it's interesting to see that there's a cyclical recovery in Brazil, as seen by them and by us. So Brazil's role to provide a much bigger portion of beef which will be traded internationally is something which is highlighted here and which we believe firmly. We also believe that although we don't see a big surplus in North America, we see a lot of trade in and out of North America. So we are going to see a certain category of items being exported because there is a market for them abroad, and another category of items being imported. So there will be a lot of trade in and out of the U.S. regardless of the fact that there isn't a major surplus in the U.S. And then we see where the deficit is, the red spots on the map, and basically it's in the emerging economies where income is increasing, as Jason said earlier, and where, as income does increase, in our opinion, first phase of income increase, people improve their diet. So it's very much related towards animal protein and specifically towards beef. Back to Brian. Excuse me.